Hi, I'm Scott Ampleford. I'm a composer for film, television, and recently video games, and this is my studio. So let's start with the computer. I'm using a 2010 model Mac Pro. I bought it in 2011 or 2012. And I've just been using it solidly ever since. It's an absolute workhorse. I am hoping to replace it this year or early next year because it is beginning to show some signs of its age, but it still does everything I need it to do. So I really can't complain. It's fantastic. My software of choice for making music is Logic. I just like Logic. It does everything I need it to do right out the box. It works really well with all my plugins and scoring to picture, which is something that I do an awful lot. It's really perfect for that. I also kind of trained on it. Logic was the software of choice that my university used and my college before that. So it's just what I'm most comfortable with. I have a 3-monitor setup, which I'm sure someone will think is quite extravagant and someone else will say that's not enough. But again, for scoring to picture, this is kind of the perfect system for me, where I can sort of have video playback, the project window and a mixer or a score window open at the same time, and I can just sort of keep a close eye on everything that's going on. In terms of audio in and out, I use a PreSonus Fire Studio Project, which is actually a really cool little audio interface. I'm kind of maligning having to upgrade my computer because with the newer models of computer, these are no longer compatible. But this is fantastic. 8 inputs right in the front, which is just super handy. A lot of audio interfaces, everything's tucked around the back and they force you to use patch bays, but having everything in the front is really, really handy. So I absolutely love that. And then elsewhere on the desk, I should probably talk about my monitors. These are Edarols. I always forget the numbers. What are these? MA10As. These are sort of rubbish, but they're good enough for what I need. I am not a producer. I mix my own stuff when I have to, but more than anything else, I'm a composer, so I need to hear what the notes are doing, and these are perfectly fine for that. I actually got these for free, which is why I've been so reluctant to replace them. An old school teacher, they were broken. An old school teacher told me that if I could fix them, they were mine. I fixed them, so they're mine now. Elsewhere on the desk, I've got a small-ish collection of pedals. I'm not massively into pedals. There's something I'm beginning to explore more recently. I think it would be nice to have an analog version of all the basic effects, chorus, flanger, phaser, overdrive, fuzz, that sort of stuff. And so I'm sort of beginning to put together a little pedal board that allows for that. But yeah, I got some stuff from Behringer and TC Electronic, kind of inexpensive stuff, and then some really lovely pedals from Greg Lounsbury at Lounsbury Pedals, which I really, really love. Those are great. Then moving on to sort of synthy stuff that I have around here, I've got the Behringer Wasp Deluxe, which is kind of just here because I have nowhere else to put it. At this moment in time, I have plans for it, but they haven't come into play yet. But it's just a really kind of useful monosynth to have on hand. It's got quite a characterful sound. And then below that, I have tucked away my Waldorf Streichfett, which is on my desk because it does get a lot of use. That sort of 70s string ensemble sound was something that was really important to my last couple of albums, Spiral to the Center and Vortex. But once you sort of step away from those kind of sounds, it also does lots of very interesting sort of harsh, cold digital stuff, which I find quite useful. And then the last sort of synthy thing that I have on here is I have a Korg M3R rack unit, which is basically the Korg M1 in a box, I believe. I bought that on a whim like 10 years ago for very, very little money and then never used it. And then a few years back, I was about to sell it and I got a job composing the score to an animated show called Motorcycle Boyfriend. And sort of 90% of the score is the M3R. So now I can never sell it. Just want to quickly interrupt the tour to say a huge thank you to synthesizers.com for sponsoring this video. If you want to get 10% off your purchase at synthesizers.com, you can use the code AMPLEFORD10 at checkout. If you like what I do here, you can let me know by leaving me a like or a comment or by subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos from me. And if you really like what I do, you can buy me a coffee or purchase some of my music from Bandcamp. I will, of course, put all of the requisite links in the description or in cards along the top. All right, back to the tour. So my Midi Master keyboard is a Studio Logic SL990 Pro. I chose this because it was the cheapest master keyboard that I could find with hammer action keys. That was kind of it. It was hammer action keys and a mod and pitch wheel. I didn't want one with lots of faders and drum pads and extra encoders and stuff like that. I just don't need it. It doesn't really fit into my workflow. So I just wanted a master keyboard with a mod and pitch wheel and hammer action keys, and this was the cheapest option available. And it's great. It feels nice. It has a good response, and I sort of sequence everything into Logic with that. Orchestral music, electronic music, everything. It's great. Above that, I have my Yamaha DX7, which is, of course, one of the most important synthesizers of the 80s. I bought this in like 2014 when I was working on a score that really wanted that super retro 80s over-the-top kind of sound, and obviously it's fantastic for that. These days it doesn't get quite so much use. I am actually thinking of getting rid of it, but for the moment it sort of sits there and is unintrusive, and every now and again I'll do something that needs something bell-like or something, and that's fine. But then crossing to the real centerpiece of my studio, this is of course my MU modular synthesizer. I absolutely love this. This is my baby. It is largely synthesizers.com. It started out as a synthesizers.com entry system purchase plan, and I sort of then built it up from there. Sort of the plan for it was, I wanted it to be like the ultimate mono synth. So in my mind at the time, the two ultimate mono synths were the Moog Mini Moog and the EMS VCS3. So when I was putting this system together, I kind of wanted it to have, at least 3 oscillators like the Mini Moog and the VCS3. I wanted it to have a spring reverb like the VCS3. Choosing my filters was important, and so now I've got the Moog style ladder filter from .com and the Sea Devils filter, which is the VCS3 type filter from STG Sound Labs. But yeah, I've got modules in here from synthesizers.com, STG Sound Labs, Core Synth, Frequency Central, Martin Yankola, Moon Modular, and some of my own kind of rubbish DIY attempts too. But no, I have used this on pretty much every job I've ever done since I started building it. And it's still, it's patched up right now because I'm using it in the score I'm working on right now. And obviously, yeah, plenty of room to expand. Currently filled with TARDISes. I am an enormous Doctor Who fan, have been all of my life. One of my first professional gigs as a composer was on a Doctor Who related project. I worked on that for 6 years, and it's kind of a very important part of my career. Yeah, I'm just growing up a Doctor Who fan. Even before that, I always think that, you know, no studio would be complete without some Daleks and some TARDISes. And of course, as an electronic music fan, like, Doctor Who is like massively important. You know, you got like the Radiophonic Workshop stuff in the 60s, and the VCS3 work of Dudley Simpson in the 70s, and then the, you know, the CS80 and DX7 stuff that was happening in the 80s with people like Peter Howell and stuff. If you're a Doctor Who fan and you're an electronic music fan, that's great, because you get like the full run of like 20th century electronic music just by watching Doctor Who. So yeah, I've got TARDISes filling gaps, you know, there's some things I want. There's some modules I want. So the TARDISes will have to go. You know, I really want a state variable filter, which will go exactly there, and both TARDISes will have to move, and I'll have to find somewhere else for them. But, you know, yeah. So below the modular, I've got my very first synthesizer, the Korg Micro Korg. I don't think I could ever bear to part with it. But it actually does still sometimes come in handy. It still has the power to surprise me sometimes, where, you know, especially when you sort of move away from the virtual analog stuff and do digital stuff with it, it can produce some really interesting sounds, and I'll use it a fair bit. For sequencing the modular, I use the BeatStep Pro. I have two MIDI interfaces in the modular. One which is just for the keyboard, and the other which is permanently hooked up to the computer, so I can send MIDI to the modular from my computer. But I also then send trigger out of that into the BeatStep Pro, and then the BeatStep Pro I use for sort of like a lot of gate sequencing, and sort of like triggering sort of percussive sounds, and also, to be honest, I do use the melodic sequencers in it, because I kind of figured that if I'm programming in a sequence with rotary encoders, I'm not looking at a keyboard. So the sequences I come up with the knobs are different to sequences I would come up with at a keyboard. But it's just kind of a bit of a handy Swiss Army knife kind of thing. So's the modular, to be honest. I use the modular an awful lot for sending other signals around the studio. You know, I process sounds through the modular, but I also sort of use the LFOs for other synths, and, you know, use things like the instrument interface to create clocks from devices that don't have clock outputs and that sort of stuff. So yeah, a lot of this is kind of really generally useful studio stuff, but I do also use it then to trigger the drum machines. I only have two drum machines. I have the Akai Tomcat, which is a much maligned drum machine, but I actually like it quite a lot. It's an analog drum machine. It's only got like 5 voices, but I have found that it actually sits in a weird niche, where it kind of produces sounds that feel a little bit like some really old drum machines. You know, it kind of can sit in the sort of Korg Mini Pops, Roland CR78 kind of camp, and that's where I use it. And then the other drum machine I have is the Volca Beats, which has become a little bit of a classic, even though it is the butt of some jokes. But it's a really decent analog drum machine. The kick, I think, sounds fantastic, and it kind of, all the other sounds have this sort of lo-fi charm that I find quite good, but then the snare, if you use it in conjunction with the stutter, you can really like fatten it up and it will sound sort of pretty big, and I like that. Yeah. Moving away from this section to the other sort of synth wall, you know, I do have like bass guitar, keytar that gets very occasional use, electric guitar. I have a few acoustic instruments dotted about the studio. I've got like a trombone and a violin and didgeridoo and various shakers and stuff like that, and percussion instruments. I've got lots of recorders. I do a lot of stuff with recorders, especially at the moment. I just bought a tenor recorder for the score I'm currently working on. But yeah, the guitar, it's really nothing special. It's an Argos Special. Argos, for viewers not in the UK, used to be a shop that had a very, very thick catalogue that you would scroll through. And when you were a child, that was your Christmas list. You would just put like ticks next to toys. And then when you sort of become an adult, you go in there and you flick through this enormous catalogue, and you basically take a special number to a person at the shop who then goes out the back and gets something for you. So this is an Argos guitar. So it's not great, but I'm not a guitarist. A guitar is something that's always very handy to have. I do occasionally play a bit of guitar. I actually played a surprising number of the guitars on the Spiral to the Center album, but most of it, you know, I hand over gladly to people who actually know what they're doing. But for sound design and stuff, a guitar is really handy. But yeah, this is kind of the other synth wall in the studio. I've got various bits and bobs. This is very much in flux. Things move about quite a lot, and things aren't all necessarily as hooked up as they should be. I have no MIDI on this side of the room yet, which isn't causing me any problems right now because I've got some kind of vintage stuff and some voltage control stuff, so I can send voltage from over the modular and control stuff that way. But starting sort of from the bottom here, I have this Bontempi HF201, which is actually a really rubbish organ from the early 1980s. This is like a £20 Facebook Marketplace find, and I thought it sounded a bit like a string machine. So I kind of use it as a string machine, and it's very endearing, so I keep it around. It also has this inbuilt like drum machine, which again sounds rubbish, but it kind of is useful. I actually use that on Vortex, the track part 7 of Vortex. The main drum machine is that. But yeah, that sort of perfect vintage vibe. Above that, I've got my Roland Juno 6. I love the Juno 6. It's a fantastic little synthesizer. You know, not a huge amount needs to be said about the Juno 6 because it's kind of ubiquitous. It's from the 80s. It sounds like it's from the 80s. But also I found it in my line of work. If you don't use it with the chorus, it is the perfect mix sitter. It just sits in a mix perfectly because it's one oscillator per voice and they are DCOs. So they're all like hyper stable and they'll just sit there and it's great. Basses, pads, leads, weird sound effects. It's fantastic. It's really good, I think, in film music. And then up here, I have some Behringer stuff. I've got some of the 2500 modules from Behringer, sort of 2 sequencers, and then I've got the Neutron, which I think is actually the best synthesizer Behringer have made. It has some really interesting and useful features, and I use it a lot for sort of sound designy stuff, like ambient-y sound designy stuff. Arturia Mini Brute, again, just a really good, solid analog monosynth. It sounds really beefy and rich and has some sort of interesting features with a sort of wave folder and the way it mixes waveforms and has some digital elements. You know, it's got an arpeggiator and a digital LFO which can do some interesting things. And then I've got a tape machine which is hooked up. This does get used. I have 2 of these Akai 4000 DS's. This is a Mark 1. I've got the Mark 2. I bought them several years ago when I was doing a film score that needed to sort of sound like it was done by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, that sort of 50s and 60s early electronic music vibe. So I got 2 of these machines and I was doing feedback and loops and splicing and sort of frippatronics and stuff like that. And I kept a hold of them, and I now use it for sort of grungifying and general vintagification of sounds, but also for tape delay. Some of the tape delay on the Vortex album actually came from that, and it's kind of, it's not a pro machine, it's a consumer machine for the home market, so it kind of isn't as good as other tape machines, and therefore it has a sound that I find quite useful. Every studio needs a lava lamp. This is a Akai S2000 sampler. Again, it's got a really, really grungy sound. You know, I sampled the Modular into it to make the Modular polyphonic, but you know, it kind of isn't a really good replication of the sound, so everything sounds a little bit crap. But as I've said before in videos in the past, sometimes a little bit crap is exactly the sound you're looking for. And then this side of the room is kind of the anomaly side of the room. This is kind of storage. I've got music books and files and folders. These drawers are full of various percussion instruments and woodwind instruments and power supplies and computer parts. And then I've got things like a bench drill and some electronic components in case I need to do any electronic DIY stuff. You know, I built a weird sound generator from Music from Outer Space, and I've built some modules, and you know, just kind of having that space is kind of handy. But the one thing that it's kind of probably quite evident just from looking around the space and by hearing me in it is there's no acoustic treatment in here. I have carpet on the floor, and that's your lot in terms of acoustic treatment. And that was actually quite a conscious choice on my part, because I spend most of my life in here writing music, and that's the point. I'm writing kind of more than I am recording, and if I am recording, it's largely electronic. And so I had a choice between putting up, you know, acoustic panels, and yes, you can get some attractive acoustic panels, or putting up some art. And I thought, well, seeing as this is a space I'm going to spend the rest of my life in, and it has no windows, art was a good idea. So I've sort of filled the wall with, you know, these are all posters from projects I've worked on in the past, and there's plenty of other wall space that I'm going to adorn with stuff like that. But that kind of concludes the tour. This has been my studio. I want to thank you enormously for watching the video. I want to again thank synthesizers.com for the sponsorship. Once again, I will say that you can get 10% off at synthesizers.com if you use the code Ampleford10 at checkout. And yeah, thanks for touring my studio with me. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.